A very good evening everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 13th May 2025 and today we have some very important topics from different newspapers, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed manner. And the first article that we're going to start this discussion is with about the higher education system in India. So particularly we are discussing about the higher educational institutions, and this could be important for your general studies paper too, particularly for your mains examination. And in present days, the higher educational institutions have been facing certain challenges. However, it is very important that if we wanted to improve the standards of the higher education system, so we must look into these shortcomings, these challenges that the higher educational institutions have been facing. However, in this article, the author have been expressing his views about the higher educational institutions and the shortages or the challenges that these higher educational institutions have been facing. And in fact, for any country, in order to produce the skilled manpower, higher educational institutions play a very important role. So in this context, we'll understand what are the main challenges that these higher educational institutions have been facing and how to address those challenges. So the context is that in higher educational institutions, there is a centralizing tendency, and this trend has been observed in the higher educational institutions, right? So particularly this centralization trend by the regulatory bodies. For example, in India, the higher educational institutions are regulated by the University Grants Commission. So University Grants Commission is a statutory body and it regulates the higher educational institutions in India. But in recent times, such regulatory bodies have been showing the centralization tendency of the higher educational institutions. This is the first issue. And the second issue is that there is also an ideological interference within the higher educational institutions, and that is also posing major challenges. And thirdly, corporatization of university spaces is also another major problem. So these are the major problems that the higher educational institutions have been facing in India. So therefore, all these different problems or challenges over a period of time leading to growing threats to accommodate academic freedom and also the institutional autonomy in higher educational institutions. So remember, institutional autonomy is very important for higher educational institutions. And institutional autonomy along with academic freedom, they are important tenets of the higher educational institutions. But the institutional freedom and institutional autonomy of these higher educational institutions is impacted by the increasing centralization tendency of the regulatory bodies such as UGC, and ideological interferences and corporatization of the university spaces, and this is the trend that has been largely observed in the higher educational institutions. However, this broadly reflects the crisis in the higher educational institutions and the governance of higher educational institutions, and even there is a shrinking space for a dissent and critical thinking. So also understand that universities promote debates, critical thinking, and they also promote dissent as well. But here the problem is that the higher educational institutional governance over a period of time leading to shrinking space for dissent and also the critical thinking as well. And that has been over a period of time leading to a shrinking of intellectual debates and shrinking of dissent as well as the effectiveness of the higher educational institutions overall. Now you could see there is a centralization or the bureaucratic control over academia has been increasing, and there is a reduction in the institutional freedom or institutional autonomy as well for these higher educational institutions. So as we have already discussed that the regulatory bodies like University Grant Commission, so they actually shows the centralization tendency on the higher educational institutions. And recently for higher educational institutions, in particular and higher education in general, national education policy is also applied. So along with the regulatory bodies and policies like national education policy, so they heavily influence syllabus of these higher educational institutions, design, appointments, and even the direction of the research as well. So over a period of time, what has been happening, all these factors have been leading to declining academic freedom, and also declining the institutional autonomy, of the higher educational institutions, and they are generally considered as the core tenets of the higher educational system in India. Apart from that, there is a uniformity of syllabus that can also be observed across different universities or different institutions. And when there is a uniformity in syllabus, so that effectively eliminates regional, disciplinary, and the ideological diversities which are existing all around India. So India is generally known for diversity. So we have we are a country with a huge diversity. But when these higher educational institutions are given the uniformity in syllabus through the UGC, they are regulatory bodies, and policies like national education policy, so this very often leads to uniformity in syllabus. So this uniformity in syllabus across these institutions eliminates the diversities across different levels, and overall this leads to what? This leads to the intellectual stagnation. And in fact, the universities are known as centers of intellectual debate, and they produce intellectuals. But in universities nowadays, we could observe the intellectual stagnation, and in fact, the uniformity in syllabus along with other mechanisms or other agencies leading to discouraging radical or alternative approaches to knowledge. And this is very, very important for the higher education. And apart from that, universities are increasingly turned into instruments of state control. So there is an increasing state control on the universities as well in recent times, particularly the government controlling the universities. So again, it has been crippling the academic freedom and the institutional autonomy. So one example is that referencing to the critical thinkers, for example, Noam Chomsky is considered as a critical thinker. In case if universities or higher educational institutions take the referencing of the critical thinkers like Noam Chomsky, or even criticizing the nationalism, may attract the penalties, surveillance of the state, and even administrative backlash, and overall it has been leading to curbing the democratic expression as well. So similarly, along with the centralization and bureaucratic control over the academia, there are number of other challenges also. For example, there is a huge political interference in the functioning of the universities and higher educational institutions, and in fact lack of university education and infrastructure, because they require the state of the art infrastructure. Government needs to spend a higher amount of funds for these universities, and job market placement, industry oriented research and innovation is also lacking, and quality and assessment of practices is also lacking. So therefore, number of problems that the institutions of higher education have been facing. And apart from that, there is also a corporatization of the academic spaces, and even market driven academic priorities are also very often observed in the institutions of higher education, because as of now institutions are being restructured on the corporate models, right? So institutions, the higher educational institutions, particularly restructured to suit the corporate models, with focus on focus that has been shifting from the public service to profit generation, rankings, and the brand visibility. So all these things over a period of time leading to what? They have been eroding the educational ethos of these higher educational institutions. right? So the reason for the erosion of the educational ethos in higher educational institutions is a restructuring of the higher educational institutions into the corporate spaces or corporate models, which emphasizes on these things. And similarly, there are certain disciplines, right? So whenever there is a higher educational institution, so this should place equal importance on all disciplines rather than prioritizing some disciplines or providing better infrastructure to some disciplines over the other. Rather, all disciplines must be treated equally. But in Indian higher educational institutions, what has been happening is that there are certain disciplines like philosophy, literature, and political science. So these disciplines are deprioritized as financially unproductive, right? So there is a declining importance for these disciplines such as philosophy, literature, and political science. They are being deprioritized as economically unproductive rather than these disciplines, other disciplines such as business, technology, engineering, and other STEM fields. They are giving more and more priority over the humanities disciplines. So in terms of funding, in terms of institutional priorities as well. So this is another major problem that has been impacting the overall efficiency and productivity of the higher educational institutions. And in fact, the academics are also assessed based on the publication counts of the university or the institution, and student ratings and the global rankings. So therefore, you could clearly observe a trend that it has been often rewarding the performativity and the Western benchmarks, right? So it has been prioritizing the Western benchmarks, Western standards, or promoting the student ratings or global rankings, publication counts, rather than taking on the indigenous or contextual relevance. So there is a large scale negligence of indigenous or contextual relevance in these higher educational institutions, and that is also another major problem. And here a set of challenges that the higher educational institutions have been facing apart from these challenges that we have been discussing. So please kindly go through these issues as well. And similarly, there are the governance issues and ideological interference as well within the functioning of these higher educational institutions, because vice chancellors are appointed by the governments. So vice chancellors are increasingly drawn from the non-academic background, right? So it is generally expected that vice chancellors should belong to the academic background so that the universities would function better. The higher educational institutions would perform better if these institutions have vice chancellors who are academics. But the trend is that most of these vice chancellors are brought from non-academic and corporate backgrounds, and thereby it has been promoting inefficiency, and it has also been promoting branding over the pedagogical or scholarly engagement. And apart from that, the academic leadership often reflects the partisan or the ideological leanings as well. So ideological leanings in the sense that for a particular political party, for a particular religion. So therefore you could also see that the academic leadership very often reflects the ideological leanings. And in fact, with appointments which have been favoring individuals who are disconnected from the liberal intellectual traditions or even the critical scholarship as well, right? So all these factors, what happens is that they increase the government's control over these higher educational institutions. They cripple the intellectual resources which are being produced by these universities. They cripple debate in the higher educational institutions, and so therefore there will be an increased control and declining autonomy and academic freedom of these higher educational institutions. And in fact, there are also fear of political reprisal, so that fosters a self-censorship of faculty and teachers as well. So thereby it has been discouraging the bold research, critical classroom debates, thus overall shrinking the space for public reasoning as well as the academic dissent in the higher educational institutions. And that is very, very important, and that has been leading to inefficiencies in the universities, and that has also been leading to declining the academic freedom and the institutional autonomy in recent times as well. So therefore, what needs to be done? A set of measures have to be adopted. So vice chancellor should be appointed, and these vice chancellor must be from the academic background. And secondly, there should be more and more funding should be given for creating state of the art infrastructure in these universities, and all disciplines must be treated at par with each other. Government's control over these universities must be reduced, and the statutory bodies or regulating agencies like University Grants Commission must ensure the institutional autonomy and the academic freedom as well in these higher educational institutions. So that way we could actually improve the efficiency and productivity of higher educational institutions, and along with that a set of other reforms also that can be suggested and that can be undertaken. For example, there should be more autonomy required, and there should be more transparency and accountability in higher educational institutions, and higher employability, social responsibility, and innovation, research and entrepreneurship as well. So all these measures must be undertaken in the institutions of higher education in India. So the next very important topic. So this article has been given in the Hindu editorial section, and this is very important for your general studies paper 2, because it particularly deals with pollution caused by electronic waste. And in fact, electronic waste or e-waste causes pollution at different levels. So therefore it is a very, very serious issue. So India being a developing economy, and India is also a country with more than 140 crore population, India is also a country with the excess amount of usage of the electronic devices. So excess amount of usage of electronic devices has been leading to the increased e-waste generation. So we also have data with respect to e-waste generation in India, so we'll understand that data as well. Now the article, the context is that now we have a goal of becoming Viksit Bharat by 2047. Right? So we wanted to become a developed country by the year 2047. However, it is being powered by rapid digital transformation, right? So you cannot become a developed country without having rapid digital transformation. I mean, on our path to become a developed country, we will also achieve a rapid digital transformation. And this rapid digital transformation means that you will use a lot of digital devices, or country's population will use digital devices, mobile phones, smart watches, laptops, tablets, a number of digital devices that the people will use as part of a rapid digital transformation. And in fact, on our way to become a developed country or Viksit Bharat, we would increasingly rely on the electronic devices as well in the coming future. So however, this growing dependence or increasing dependence on the digital devices or the electronic devices, so that would generate a huge quantities of the electronic waste, which is also called as e-waste. So therefore, the main challenge that we need to face here, how we can manage the huge quantities of e-waste that has been generated in India. So we need to manage the e-waste, and at the same time we need to sustainably dispose the electronic waste as well. So in order to do that, we need to have the formal waste recycling mechanisms. we need to promote the formal e-waste recycling mechanism. We need to promote the circular economy as well. It is very, very important that we should promote the circular economy. We should promote the formal waste recycling, structures in India. So that plays a very, very important role. Now, in fact, if you can carefully look into the data of electronic waste generation in India, so India's electronic waste in terms of volume has increased to 151.03% in 6 years. So in just 6 years, there is a 151.03% increase in the total e-waste generation. So it was a 7,08,445 metric tons in the year 2017-18, increased to 17,78,400 metric tons in 23-24. However, in coming future also, there will be a rapid increase in the huge quantities of electronic waste. So therefore, the key challenge is how we can manage the electronic waste. Now here it is given that what is a e-waste. So e-waste is any electronic or electrical product which is discarded, which is not in use. So that is known as e-waste, right? So e-waste, if you are not disposing it of properly, it is a source of air pollution, soil pollution, and water pollution as well, right? So it is a key source of pollution of natural resources. So because of that particular reason, it is very important that we need to promote a circular economy. We should also have a proper structure, a proper mechanism which collect e-waste and also recycle the e-waste as well. Now, what impact that e-waste would have? So in case if we improperly manage the e-waste, so what impact that e-waste would have on the environment, on human health? We'll try to understand this, right? So beyond degradation of environment, so e-waste would have a multiple negative impacts. So firstly, it is being said that India would lose around 10 billion per annum, $10 billion per annum due to the water pollution that has been emanating from the e-waste or poor disposal of e-waste, because e-waste is the source of cyanide sulfuric acid solutions. So the cyanide and sulfuric acid solutions, they can easily enter into the water resources. They can contaminate the water resources, and thereby it will result in overall contamination of water, and it causes the water pollution as well. And similarly, e-waste would also cause air pollution. So the air pollution particularly caused by lead fumes that are generated from the e-waste, open coal burning, and even the plastic incineration and soil pollution. So therefore, overall, it will cause around $10 billion of annual costs on India if it is not properly managed and not properly disposed. The second major threat is that, so beyond just looking into the environmental pollution, so e-waste, if it is properly managed, then it will also cost around $20 billion. So this $20 billion is considered as the social cost of improper management of e-waste, right? So this is the economic cost and environmental cost, but this 20 billion is the social cost of improper management of the electronic waste per year, because the e-waste recycling or processing is being done by informal sector, illegal recyclers, particularly women and children. So women and children are comprising the majority of workforce. So whoever working in this hazardous e-waste management in an informal way, their life expectancy is also very less. So it is said that the average life expectancy of the people who are working in hazardous e-waste management industries in an informal way is less than 27 years due to their prolonged exposure to toxic substances as well. And that is why we can say that the total social cost of improper e-waste management for India is 20 billion US dollars per annum, right? So you could also go through this, what is e-waste and what is the issue. The issue is that whatever e-waste that we have been generating is not properly disposed, right? So it is not properly managed and not properly recycled. So that is the main problem, and in fact it creates pollution, soil pollution, water pollution, air pollution, right? Now in this context, so there is a new mechanism that has been introduced. What is that mechanism which has been introduced for promoting the formal e-waste management or safe disposal of e-waste, along with reducing the informal sector which is engaged in the e-waste management, because it has both social cost, economic cost and the environmental cost as well, right? So recently a floor price has been introduced as part of the extended producer responsibility certification system. Now in fact, when we talk about the electronic waste, within the electronic waste an extended producer responsibility mechanism has been introduced. So what does this extended producer responsibility mechanism says? Now imagine that A is a producer of mobile phones or any other electronic device. Now it is the obligation or the responsibility of the company A to collect and also safely dispose the electronic waste which has been generated by the company A's products. And this is simply extended producer responsibility norms or rules on this electronic company A. And this extended producer responsibility mechanism recently mandated the floor price, right? So what is this floor price? Now imagine that company A may not be able to collect the e-waste directly on itself, but company A found that there is another firm which is B, and this firm is engaged in collecting e-waste, right? So this firm is engaged in collecting e-waste. So in this case, A would pay a certain amount or a minimum amount to B for collection of e-waste that has been generated from company A, and this minimum amount would be paid to company B by company A for collection of e-waste that has been generated from company A, and this price is called as the floor price, right? So this price is called as the floor price. So I hope you have understood this. And e-waste management rules 2022 have been introduced. So they have introduced a floor price for EPR certificates, and this floor price that has been introduced by the e-waste management rules of 2022 ensures a minimum guaranteed returns for certified recycler. So here in this case, B is a certified recycler, and A would pay a minimum guaranteed amount to a certified recycler called B, so thereby providing economic security for B and also encouraging safe practices when it comes to e-waste collection, management and overall disposal as well. Now in this context, so how this floor price will help in e-waste management? So it will discourage the informal sector firstly, right? Because the floor price is only given to the certified recyclers only, and therefore it would discourage the informal sector in e-waste collection, management and disposal. Thereby it will make formal recycling an economically viable option. Secondly, it will boost recycling infrastructure as well. It is very important that this recycling infrastructure has to be promoted. Third, make the formal system much more competitive enough to challenge the cost advantages of the informal sector and unlock the value of critical minerals like copper, gold through the advanced technologies. Right. So what is the importance of stable pricing? So we'll try to understand the importance of this stable pricing through, so which is also called as the minimal or floor pricing. Now e-waste management rules 2022, so they have introduced a floor price for extended producer responsibility certificates, and this is considered as a game changer in India's e-waste management. And in fact, this provision of stable pricing or floor pricing, so it ensures that there will be a fair return that will be guaranteed for a certified or registered recyclers. Thereby it will curb informal hazardous recycling, because as of now the informal sector occupies around 95% of waste collection and waste management. The problem with the informal sector is that it will not handle the e-waste in a safe manner. Thereby it will result in air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and it will also impact the health of the waste collectors as well. And apart from that, without having a strong floor price for a certified waste recyclers, India may actually miss the chance to lead a sustainable waste management. Now it is very important whether it is a plastic waste or electronic waste or even battery waste also. So there is a need for a sustainable waste management, because otherwise it would pollute the natural resources and also impact the human health as well. However, this floor pricing can actually encourages or incentivizes the formal recyclers to adopt a safe, sustainable and cost effective, and even they can invest in advanced technologies as well. So if they are investing in advanced technologies for waste collection, management or safe disposal, so that would result in much more efficient and effective way of waste management. Thereby it would even unlock the e-waste valuable materials such as gold and the copper as well. And there are other important and essential minerals also. So if they have invested in these advanced technologies, they could even extract these essential minerals from e-waste. And apart from that, e-waste and introducing a floor pricing for e-waste would also prevent the chaos which is already existing in certain sectors such as plastic waste, right? So plastic waste management rules are also introduced in India, but as of now there is a chaos that has been existing, and this chaos has to be prevented in e-waste management and the disposal. So therefore overall it will drive investment in infrastructure which aimed at turning e-waste into a resource and even supporting the overall circular economy. So I hope you knew what exactly is a circular economy that is based on the principle of 4R. Right? So it actually, waste disposal, waste management, and recycling of the waste, and reusing the waste, recollecting the waste. So right, so it is like a circle. The resources would be used multiple times, so once they are adequately recycled, right? So the economic pivot carries a profound environmental benefits. Fair compensation motivates the recyclers, particularly the certified and organized recyclers, to prioritize material recovery over disposal, and even shrinking landfill burdens and even halting the seepage of toxins such as lead and mercury into soil and waterways. So therefore, floor pricing must be promoted. It must be introduced and it must be promoted in letter and spirit. However, so here e-waste management rules 2022 have been given. So you can go through the e-waste management rules 2022 key provisions that were introduced, some important details with respect to e-waste, and there are certain challenges in the e-waste management as well. However, this is how the circular economy can actually work. So first, a collection is part of the first stage of the circular economy, and then reuse and refurbishment and dismantling and then recovery, recycling and safe disposal of the hazardous material, and then manufacturing with the recycled material, and then it will be used by the consumers, and then ultimately once it is discarded, then collection. So this is like a circle or a cycle, right? So I hope it is clear for you. So the next important topic is shipping industry and the emissions which are being generated by the shipping industry, right? This is also a very important article from Gender Studies 3 point of view, and this has been given in the Hindu newspaper. So what is the context? The context is that recently 83rd session of the International Maritime Organization's Marine Environment Protection Committee, which is MEPC 83, has been discussing introducing a market-based measure or MBM to curb shipping emissions. So we also knew that the shipping industry across the globe is also one of the main source of the greenhouse gases. So therefore, it is very, very important that there should be a global framework, there should be a global mechanism, so that could prevent or arrest the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Because different sectors have been contributing for the global warming or contributing for the greenhouse gas emissions. So it is very, very important to address the challenges posed by these individual sectors, right? So thereby it will mark a potential first in mandatory sector-wide carbon pricing. So this is also known as the carbon pricing on the shipping industry. So this MEPC 83rd session, so this particular, the marine environment protection, so this particular session marked a critical step, right? So this is a critical step because all the countries which are party to it, so they are in principle agreeing to introduce the market-based mechanism. So they plan to introduce a market-based mechanism to overall reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the international shipping, right? So shipping industry is one of the major contributor of the greenhouse gases. So there should be a market-based mechanism, and that has been discussed in this session to reduce the greenhouse gases from the shipping industry. And in this particular session, global emissions levy has been discussed, right? So the committee has supported moving towards an emission pricing mechanism, and this mechanism is called as the global emissions levy mechanism. And in this mechanism, the shipping companies, they need to pay a set amount of fee per ton of CO2 which has been emitted by these ships, right? So in case if ships release a certain amount of CO2, the shipping companies needs to pay that amount, and that is called as the global emissions levy. And in fact, this encourages the shipping industries to achieve energy efficiency, invest in technologies such as renewable energy, and use the alternatives instead of fossil fuels, because it would cost more for the shipping industries, and ultimately it aimed at decarbonizing the shipping industry as well. So therefore, this would actually make the international shipping the first global sector with a universal carbon pricing structure if it is properly adopted. And in fact, the MBM framework, right? So the market-based mechanism framework intended to help meet the goals of International Maritime Organization's revised greenhouse gas strategy. So what is the revised greenhouse strategy of International Maritime Organization? So that aims to achieve the net zero emissions from the international shipping, right? So in fact, International Maritime Organization come up with a strategy for the greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and this strategy aimed to become net zero emissions from the international shipping industry around 2050. Now this market-based measure is part of the International Maritime Organization's larger goal of making the shipping industry net zero by 2050. And it also aimed to reduce around 20 to 30% reduction in 2030 and 70 to 80% reduction in 2040 compared to the 2008 levels, and completely becoming net zero by 2050. However, this committee has agreed to finalize the market-based measure and also adopt a legally binding measure by 2025. However, the Marine Environment Protection Committee 83 session, so there are different countries which have actually participated. For example, countries like Saudi Arabia, so they opposed this because Saudi Arabia primarily dependent on fossil fuels, right? So if there are efforts from these organizations to promote renewables or cost or impose costs on the use of fossil fuels, of course countries like Saudi Arabia, which are oil economies, they oppose. And small island developing states, so they in fact welcome this, right? Because small island developing states wanted that this carbon pricing mechanism would replenish the funding for these small island developing states for their adaptation and also mitigation of the negative effects of the climate change, because they are the worst sufferers of the climate change. Now, what does this measure actually means for India? So we should understand this aspect as well. So it is said that India will be benefiting from this measure, right? So India will benefit from this particular measure in multiple ways, because according to United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, so it has produced some estimates. So these estimates have been revealing that the shipping logistics would actually cost, so the overall cost of shipping logistics may increase only 5 to 8% by 2030, up from 32 to 35% by 2050, right? So this is actually the shipping logistic cost that India would face. However, the actual trade volumes are unlikely to be significantly affected, right? So the India's overall trade volumes would less likely impacted or affected by this market-based measure of the greenhouse gas emissions from the shipping industry. And in fact, it is said that India operates around 236 large ships, but only 135 are involved in international voyages, right? So just 135 have been involved in international voyages, so which are subjected to the MBM framework, market-based measure frameworks. So just 135 ships are subjected to MBM framework. So therefore, in this context, domestic fleets are not covered by this framework. And apart from that, India currently spends around 400 million US dollars per year on the ship fuel. However, this would cost around 108 million more by 2030. So this could be manageable increase in the context of India's growing economy. And apart from that, it also provides a green hydrogen opportunity for India. So how it provides a green energy opportunity for India? Because India's national hydrogen mission, so that we have recently launched, it aims to make the country a global exporter of the green fuels. So therefore, Indian ports such as those in Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, they are preparing to offer a green hydrogen bunkering services and even placing India at the forefront of future maritime energy hubs. right? So this is how it is going to benefit India. So next one is with respect to the germanium export restrictions by China to India, because as of now, germanium, right? So germanium export restrictions. So germanium is an important material, and in fact 50% of the germanium is produced by China alone. But recently what China has done, so China has restricted germanium exports to India. So this is weaponizing critical minerals, and that's why we have been talking about the diversification of the supply chains, particularly for the critical minerals. And that's why we are collaborating with countries like US on on these critical minerals. The context is that India's embassy in Beijing has confirmed that Indian government has formally taken up the issue of export restrictions on germanium with the Chinese authorities. And in fact, this follows a grievances raised by several Indian industry players who are affected by recent China's tightening control over export of certain critical minerals, particularly germanium. This is considered as one of the critical mineral by India out of 30 critical minerals. And this germanium is critical and very important for electronics, semiconductors manufacturing, fiber optics, and even the manufacturing of solar panels as well. Now here, germanium is a metallic element with a high conductivity. So it is having a high conductivity and high thermal conductivity, and that makes it a very important component in the semiconductor industry. For semiconductor industry, germanium is very, very important. So however, germanium wafers are thin and they are circular slices of pure germanium, and they actually serve as a foundation of several electronic devices as well. And that's why it is very, very important for any country. For India, it is very important. And germanium is a metalloid. So it is a metalloid, and that particularly possesses both metal as well as the non-metal properties. And in fact, germanium is not classified as a rare earth metal. So germanium is not a rare earth metal, but it is a critical mineral as per India's classification of 30 critical minerals. And in fact, germanium also plays a crucial and a very important role in high technology industries. So germanium is a metallic element which is used in fiber optic cables, such as germanium dioxide in preform cores. And it can also be used in infrared optics, solar photovoltaic cells, particularly in satellites and space applications also. However, it is very important or critical for high technology industries, but its supply is concentrated in China, because China is alone producing around 50% of total germanium in world. However, India as of now significantly dependent on imports of germanium and other most critical minerals, including germanium and gallium as well. And here a list of 30 most important and critical minerals which have been classified by the Indian government have been given. So you could see here germanium and gallium are the critical minerals of 30 critical minerals that the Indian government has classified. Right, so that's all in this lecture. Thank you so much, and if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.